The last thing my neighbor said to me before I moved out was, "Claire, I don't trust him." I laughed it off. I told her she was being overprotective. 3 months later, I was sitting in the dark in a stranger's car, shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone she had pressed into my hands, finally understanding that she had seen something I had been too in love to see. My name is Claire Whitmore. I was 29 years old when I married Daniel Reeves. I was 30 when I realized I had married a ghost, a carefully constructed version of a man who didn't actually exist. I want to tell you how it started, not because I want your sympathy, though I'll admit there are parts of this story where I needed it. I want to tell you because the moment that changed everything happened so fast, so quietly, that if I had blinked I would have missed it, and I almost did. Daniel and I met at a fundraiser in downtown Portland. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, like breathing. He remembered small details. He called when he said he would. He met my friends and made them like him within 20 minutes. My mother adored him. My best friend Joanna said he was almost too perfect, and I told her she watched too many crime podcasts. We dated for 14 months. He proposed on a Tuesday, which I remember thinking was so wonderfully unstaged, so real. No beach at sunset, no restaurant with a flash mob, just the 2 tables in the kitchen, him standing by the stove with a dish towel over his shoulder, sliding a ring across the counter toward me and saying, "I'd really like to do this life with you." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were married in September. The wedding was small, 42 people, a venue outside of Bend, Oregon, string lights over a field. It was the happiest day of my life. I know that sounds like something everyone says. I mean it in the way that it becomes painful later, knowing exactly where the happiness ended and the carefully managed illusion began. The first thing that happened, the first thing I can point to now and say, that was a sign, came on our 3rd day back from the honeymoon. Daniel asked me to sign some paperwork for our new joint account. We had talked about combining finances. I trusted him completely. He slid the folder across the breakfast table, already tabbed with those little colored sticky notes at every signature line, and said he needed to get it to the bank by noon. I was still half asleep. I signed every line without reading a single word. I want to stop here and say something directly to you, please. I don't care if it is your husband, your mother, your oldest friend. Please read what you sign. Read every single word. What I had signed was not just a joint account agreement. I found that out much later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first few months of marriage were good, or what I understood as good. Daniel traveled for work. He was a commercial real estate consultant. At least that was what he had always told me. And when he was home, he was attentive and present. We cooked dinner together on Sundays. We talked about eventually moving somewhere with a backyard, maybe a dog. The small things started so slowly, I genuinely did not recognize them as a pattern. He began asking to see my phone, not demanding, just casually reaching for it in a way that felt like intimacy. "Who were you texting?" But gently, almost playfully. He started having opinions about which of my friends he preferred I spend time with. He forgot to transfer money into our shared account twice in a month, which left me short when I went to pay for my own car insurance. When I brought it up, he apologized so thoroughly that I felt guilty for mentioning it. I was 8 months into the marriage when the first real crack appeared. I had taken a half day from work. I was a pediatric occupational therapist at a clinic in Northwest Portland, and I came home early to find Daniel on the phone in the driveway. I could see him through the kitchen window before he saw me. His whole posture was different. The ease I always associated with him was gone. He stood rigid, one hand pressed against the car roof, voice low and fast. When he came inside and saw me at the kitchen counter, something crossed his face. It was less than a second. He smoothed it immediately into a smile. "Early day?" he said. "Half day," I said. "Everything okay?" "Client stuff," he said. "Boring." I believed him. I made us both coffee. But I kept thinking about that fraction of a second. 6 weeks later, my colleague Maya told me she had run into someone at the farmer's market who asked if I was the Claire who was married to Daniel Reeves. When Maya said yes, the woman went very still. She said her name was Patricia Gomez. She said she had something she wanted to tell me, and she gave Maya a phone number to pass along. I almost didn't call. I told myself it was nothing. An ex-girlfriend who hadn't gotten over him. I had been married nearly 10 months by then. We were happy. Or I was. I called on a Thursday evening when Daniel was traveling. Patricia answered on the second ring. She spoke carefully, like someone who had rehearsed what she needed to say and was afraid of saying it wrong. She told me she had been engaged to a man named Daniel Reeves 4 years ago, that the engagement had ended suddenly when she discovered he had been systematically moving money out of her savings account through a power of attorney she had signed. She paused when she said this, without fully reading. The room got very quiet around me. She told me that by the time she understood what had happened, $43,000 was gone, that the account had been drained through a series of small transfers over 11 months, each one just below the threshold that would trigger a bank alert, that when she confronted him, he disappeared within 48 hours. New city, she assumed. She had filed a police report. Nothing came of it. She had spent the last 4 years wondering if it had happened to anyone else. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after we hung up. I pulled out the folder from our filing cabinet, the one I had signed at the breakfast table, and I read every page for the first time. He had power of attorney over my personal accounts, not just the joint account, all of them. I checked my savings the next morning, nothing unusual yet, but when I looked at the transaction history carefully, going back 6 months, I found 11 transfers, small ones, between $300 and $900 each, all to an account number I did not recognize, all authorized under my signature. Total, just under $6,000. So far, I need to describe what that feels like, to look at your own signature on a document you do not remember reading and understand that you handed someone the key to everything you had worked for. It does not feel like anger first. It feels like the floor dropping out from under you. It feels like every memory you have suddenly becoming a question. I did not confront him. This was a decision I made very deliberately, though I was terrified. Patricia had confronted him and he had vanished. If he vanished, the money vanished with him. I needed to be smarter than my fear. I called my mother. I told her everything in one long, low voice from my car in the clinic parking garage. She was silent for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Come home." I told her I couldn't yet. I needed a few days. That Saturday, Daniel took me to breakfast at a place we liked in the Pearl District, a corner spot with good light and bottomless coffee. He was relaxed and warm, the version of himself I had first fallen in love with, and sitting across from him, I had this terrible doubling sensation, like I was watching 2 films playing over each other. He stepped away to take a call halfway through our food. He did this often. I had learned not to ask about the calls. While he was gone, I became aware of a woman at the table just behind mine. She was in her late 50s or early 60s, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a coffee cup untouched in front of her. She had been there when we arrived. She was looking at me. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She reached into the pocket of her blazer, removed something small, and leaned very slightly toward me. She pressed a folded piece of paper and what felt like a small stack of bills into my hand under the edge of the table. Her grip was firm and deliberate. She said quietly, the kind of quiet that is more serious than a whisper, "He's done this before. More than once. You need to go, and you cannot use your own cards to do it." Then she sat back, picked up her coffee, and looked out the window. I held completely still. When Daniel came back to the table, I smiled at him. I told him the eggs were getting cold. I held the folded bills and the paper in my lap with both hands, and I did not move them for the rest of the meal. In the car, he drove. I looked straight ahead. Underneath my right thigh on the passenger seat was the paper and $340 in cash. I waited until he was in the shower that evening to open the paper. It had a name, Margaret Osei, and a phone number with a Portland area code. Below that, in neat capital letters, "Call from a phone she has never touched." I drove to a CVS the next morning, bought a prepaid phone with cash, and called the number from the parking lot. Margaret answered. She told me she was a retired forensic accountant. She told me her younger sister had been engaged to a man named Daniel Reeves 6 years ago and had lost her entire savings, $61,000, a down payment for a house she had been saving for since she was 22, before realizing what had happened. Her sister had eventually moved away. She still had anxiety that made it difficult to hold a job. Margaret told me she had been tracking Daniel Reeves for 3 years. She had a file. She knew about Patricia. She believed there were at least 4 women total, possibly more. She had been trying to build a case substantial enough for authorities to act on rather than file away, and she had been waiting for the right person, someone still inside the situation, with access to help her close it. She said, "I know this is a lot. I know you don't know me. You don't have to decide anything right now. But I need you to know that you are not the first, and if we don't do something, you will not be the last." We talked for 2 hours in that parking lot. By the end of it, I was crying in a way I hadn't since I was a child, the kind of crying that isn't about sadness exactly, but about the release of something you've been holding up for too long. Over the next 3 weeks, while Daniel traveled and came home and made dinner and asked about my days, Margaret and I built a plan. She had already been working with a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Detective Inara Walsh, who had reviewed the information Margaret brought her and confirmed that what Daniel was doing constituted fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception, among other charges. The barrier had always been getting enough current documentation. Patricia and Margaret's sister had both been willing to provide statements. What Detective Walsh needed was a live case. I became the live case. I stopped accessing my accounts from home. I used the prepaid phone. I photographed every document in the filing cabinet and sent them to Margaret's secure email. I wrote down every transfer date, every amount, every account number I could find. I did this methodically, at night when Daniel was asleep, using a small flashlight rather than turning on the overhead light. I found more than missing money. In a locked box in the back of the hall closet, I found the key in the pocket of a jacket he never wore. There were papers, printed emails, account statements, and names I didn't recognize, and a spiral notebook filled in Daniel's handwriting organized like a timeline, names, dates, dollar amounts, the status of each account. There were 6 names in that notebook. I was the 7th entry. The page with my name was the most recent. Besides some of the earlier names, he had written the single word, closed. I photographed every page. I sent everything to Margaret. She forwarded it to Detective Walsh that same night. The detective called me the next morning on the prepaid phone. Her voice was steady and professional, and when she finished reviewing what I had sent, she said, "Ms. Whitmore, this is exactly what we needed. We are going to move quickly. I need you to stay calm and stay safe." They planned the arrest for the following Thursday, when Daniel would be returning from a trip to Seattle. He was scheduled to land at PDX at 2:15 in the afternoon. Detective Walsh's team would meet him at the gate, but that was still 5 days away. Those 5 days were the hardest of my life. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner. I sat across from him at our table and I talked about my patients and the weather and what we might do for Thanksgiving. He told me about his meetings in Seattle. He reached across the table and took my hand and said, "I'm glad we built this." I said, "Me too." Wednesday night, the night before the arrest, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to him breathe, and I thought about the 6 names in that notebook. I thought about the word closed. I thought about how long he had been doing this, how many women had sat exactly where I was sitting, feeling exactly what I had once felt, and how none of them had known. Thursday morning, I told Daniel I had an early patient and left the house at 7. I drove to Margaret's apartment. We sat together at her kitchen table and waited. Detective Walsh called at 2:33 p.m. They had him. He had been detained at the gate. He was calm, she said, almost eerily calm, which she told me was consistent with individuals who had been managing deception long term. They were processing him now. With the documentation I had provided, combined with the formal statements from Patricia and 2 other women who had since come forward when Margaret reached out, they had enough. I sat in Margaret's kitchen and I pressed my hands flat on the table and I breathed. The charges were filed publicly. Because the amounts crossed a federal threshold and because the conduct spanned multiple states, Daniel had apparently done versions of this in 3 different cities before Portland. It became a federal case. There was a brief article in the local paper. Patricia sent me a message that just said, "Thank you." The hardest part, people assume, was the betrayal. And yes, that was devastating in a way I am still working through. There are days when I look at a photograph from the wedding and I feel something so complicated I don't have a name for it. But the hardest part was actually something smaller and more specific. It was the morning after the arrest when I went back to the house alone to get my things, and I stood in the kitchen where he had pushed that ring across the counter, and I understood that the man I had loved had never existed. He was a performance, a role he had learned to play from years of practice. Grief is strange when the person you're grieving was never real. I moved in with my mother for a month. I started seeing a therapist. I closed every account that had his name attached and opened new ones with a different bank. I hired a lawyer who helped me begin the annulment process on the grounds of fraud. She told me it was one of the cleanest cases she had seen. Margaret and I have lunch sometimes now. She is methodical and dry and funny in a way I did not expect that first morning in the CVS parking lot. I asked her once why she had come to the restaurant herself that Saturday rather than simply calling me. She said she had tried other approaches over the years. She had sent letters. She had tried to make contact through mutual connections. Daniel had a way of intercepting and isolating. She needed to reach me directly, in person, in a moment when he was not watching. She had been studying his patterns long enough to know he always took calls away from the table. The window was about 4 minutes, she said. 4 minutes. She had handed me the rest of my life in 4 minutes. I want to say something to anyone who is watching this, and something about it feels familiar. Not the scale of it necessarily. It doesn't have to be fraud or financial abuse. But if someone in your life makes you feel like you are slowly losing access to yourself, your money, your friends, your judgment, your voice, please listen to that feeling. It is not nothing. It is your instinct trying to keep you alive. And if a stranger ever presses something into your hand and says, "Run," even if you are afraid, even if it doesn't make sense yet, even if you love the person you would be running from, take the money, read the note, make the call. I did. And I am still here.